Welcome to Otherworld. Stories of the strange and supernatural. Today, we offer the final installment of Abaddon. Stuck in the revolving doors, Zane Crookshank felt like a rat in a trap. The horrifying, bloodless apparition in the glass seemed to morph into that of the dying boy in the wheelchair. All Zane wanted to do was get away. But the old man with the oxygen tank on the opposite side of the revolving door was shuffling along, maddeningly slowly. Panicking, Zane pushed the emergency handle. The revolving door jerked, bumping the old man from behind and shoving him along with his oxygen tank, but allowing Zane to at last make his escape to the sidewalk. A passing delivery person carrying a medical container marked human tissue witnessed what Zane had done and frowned at him disapprovingly. "Hey, buddy, have some common decency." Zane didn't respond. He just wanted to get away from the hospital, the dying boy, and that terrifying ghostly face. As he hastened down East 68th Street, he made a mental note to get the prescription filled after he landed in Halifax. He flagged down a cab and told the driver to take him to LaGuardia. Then at last, he returned his lawyer's call. It was, as he suspected, about the investigation. "Well, if I can give you a piece of advice," said his lawyer, "I think there's a simple way to make this all go away. You just have to cut the ground out from underneath Congressman Penfold and all these social justice warriors." "How?" asked Zane. "I suggest you take the profit from the price increase of Retronol, use it to set up a charitable foundation, and make the drug available free to anyone who doesn't have insurance coverage. We could say that you planned to do it all along, but that the media and politicians made a circus out of it. I could backdate some hard copy communications between us and make it look legit." "Thanks for the advice," said Zane. "But with all due respect, I didn't spend 6 months engineering the takeover of a drug company in order to turn it into a charity. Let's hire a private intelligence agency to dig up some dirt on this congressman. Once we have something on him, an affair, a suspicious campaign contribution, that'll shut him up. Maybe we can even force him to publicly apologize." "You sure you want to play it that way?" "Totally. I don't see any reason why I should cave to these people. I want everything that's coming to me." It was evening by the time Zane landed in Nova Scotia. He was tired, and since the nearest drugstore still open was in the opposite direction, back toward Halifax, he decided to wait till the next day to get his prescription filled. The sun was setting now, and his helipad wasn't yet equipped for night landings, so he hired a limousine to take him the rest of the way. By the time he arrived at Abaddon, night had fallen. In his haste to get to the hospital the previous day, he had forgotten to set the timer for the lights. The mansion was in complete darkness. Its silhouette was barely visible against the night sky. "Abaddon is quite a place," said the driver. "I wonder if all the stories about it are true." Zane didn't answer. He found the locals annoyingly talkative. And this driver was no exception, irritating him with his inability to resist one final comment. "Oh, you're a brave man, considering what they say about Edwin Fraser in that house."
You mean that he was a shipwrecker and that Abaddon was built from wood taken from the Cassandra?
No, not that. Everybody knows that part is true. I mean what they say about one of the victims of the Cassandra, who was still alive when Fraser and his crew descended on the wreck. Story is that the Cassandra's bosun lost an arm when the rigging collapsed. He realized that he and his crewmates had been drawn to their doom by false lights that Fraser had set up on the shore. As the bosun lay bleeding to death, he put a curse on Edwin Fraser and said that if he or anyone else profited from the crime, that he would haunt them from the other side if he was able to, and torment them until death was a more agreeable option than life.
What happened to the bosun?
Asked Zane.
They say that Fraser himself held the mortally wounded man's head under the water right out there in front of your house until he drowned. Then Fraser cast his victim's body into the surf so it would look like an accident. That's what they say.
Zane sneered.
Well, people with too much time on their hands say a lot of things.
As the lights of the limousine disappeared down the driveway, the night seemed to close in around Zane. He made his way with difficulty up the path to the entrance and tripped on a flagstone that jutted up unevenly from the walkway. He cursed, but regained his balance. He reached the entrance without further incident. In the dim light, the Cassandra's figurehead looked even more disapproving than usual. In fact, she seemed to be scowling now. He could swear that someone had repainted the mouth since yesterday, turning it into a frown. That would be just like the people of New Eidolon, he thought. A bunch of superstitious mental dwarfs who were jealous of the success of outsiders. He made a note to call the security company and have surveillance cameras installed. That way, he would know for sure in the future if anyone had trespassed on his property and could have them charged. He fumbled in the dark with his keys, then unlocked the front door. The alarm tone sounded. He entered the code that deactivated it and heard a rustling noise from upstairs.
Is somebody there?
He called out. There was more rustling, but no reply.
I've got a Glock semi-automatic.
He lied.
You better get the hell out of here before I put a hole in you.
He eased the front door shut behind him, and a moment later, heard the sound of an upstairs door slamming. He cautiously made his way up to the second floor. Peering into his bedroom, he saw that one of the French doors was open and swinging in the wind, brushing against the curtains. He guessed that the vacuum created when he opened the front door must have caused the other French door to open under the influence of a sea breeze, then slam when he closed it. Zane took several deep breaths to calm his heartbeat and steady his trembling fingers. At least he knew that what he'd heard was real, and that he wasn't losing his mind, and that it was nothing more sinister than the wind. Still, he was beginning to wish he'd taken the time to have his prescription filled, just in case there was anything to what Dr. Bloom had said.
My conclusion is that your symptoms are an anxiety response.
Zane was exhausted now. He checked all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked. Then he called the security company and left a message on their voicemail.
Yeah, this is Zane Crookshank. I think there have been some trespassers on my property. I'd like you to come out in the morning and install security cameras.
Then he hung up and poured himself a stiff scotch. He downed it quickly, then headed to bed. Soon, he was fast asleep. He was awakened during the night by the sound of leaves pelting the panes of the French doors that led from his bedroom to the deck. He had no idea how long he'd been asleep, but evidently a storm had rolled in off the ocean. The wind rose quickly, howling through the trees and rattling the doors on their hinges. It sounded like a hurricane, though Zane thought it was too early in the season for it. He heard branches snapping, then the sound of waves very close by. Alarmed, he threw back the bed covers and rushed to the window. He could see that the churning tide had risen so much that white water now rolled across the front lawn, all the way up to the steps. The custom surfboard that he had left by the front porch the day before was now being carried away, spinning end for end in the rushing water. He fumbled for a light switch, finally located it, but found that the electricity was out. He heard windows breaking downstairs. Zane rummaged in the bedside table for a flashlight. When he at last located one, he ran into the hall and shone it down the stairwell. The storm surge had breached the main floor and was beginning to creep up the stairs towards the second floor. His means of escape through the house was now cut off. He would have to call for help, and quickly. Zane ran back into his bedroom and searched in the dark for his cell phone. He at last located it and keyed in 911, but there was no signal. The cell tower down the street must have been knocked out by the storm, he thought. There was no way out now, and the water was still rising. Hearing a crash, he turned to see that the French doors that looked out over the ocean had been shattered by an oak branch that now lay on the floor. The cold wind roared through his bedroom, and rain began to soak his handmade Persian rug. Zane decided to take refuge at the top of the house on the Widow's Walk. There, he thought, he could better assess the situation and perhaps get a cell signal so that he could call for a rescue. He groped his way through the dark up the spiral staircase that led to the roof. As he threw open the hatch and stepped outside, the sleet stung his cheeks and nearly blinded him. Shielding his face against it with one hand, he gripped the railing of the Widow's Walk and peered over the edge. What he saw made him tremble. The swirling surf, phosphorescent in the dark, now surrounded Abaddon. He looked out toward the ocean and ruefully noted that the massive concrete blocks that he had placed on the beach to keep people out were now funneling the raging tidal surge towards his house, so it took the full impact of the sea. A swell hit the front porch, breaking some support beams. He felt the building begin to shift under him. Zane realized, to his horror, that the pounding waves were loosening the mansion from its very foundations. Creaking and groaning, the house at last broke away and began to drift from the tree line toward the ocean. Soon, it would be too late to escape. He ran to the back of the Widow's Walk and peered over the railing. There was water everywhere. But he reasoned that it would be shallower at the back of the house, and he would have a better chance of escaping to dry land. He spotted the ship's lifesaver that the previous owners had hung on the railing as a decoration. Zane loathed its kitschiness and had been planning to throw it in the garbage, but hadn't gotten around to it. Now, it presented his only hope of survival. So he lowered it over his shoulders, positioned it snugly around his waist, then climbed over the railing. He hesitated, staring into the swirling black water below. Then he leapt off the Widow's Walk. Just like he had always heard, time seemed to slow down as he tumbled toward the waves. He felt like he was suspended in the eye of the storm, and that somehow he might remain unaffected by it all. Then inevitably, he hit the churning water. After plummeting 3 stories, the force of the impact stunned him. The roar of the wind, the rush of the waves, the stinging sensation of the sleet on his face, all of it receded into nothingness momentarily behind the pain of the blow. When he opened his eyes, Zane found that he was beneath the waves, and all was quiet, except for the sound of his own heartbeat and the blood coursing through his veins. Somehow, despite the darkness of the night, he could see into the depths. In the distance, just at the edge of his vision, he spotted the horrifying apparition he had seen when he was caught in the undertow, and again at the hospital. It was, he realized, the bosun, its one arm reaching out, pointing at him accusingly. This time, however, the specter was joined by other ghostly figures, all with the same bloodless faces, all with those hideous, sunken black eyes that watched him, expressionless but relentless. Their rotting sailors' clothing hung off their skeletal bodies. Led by the bosun, the phantom crew moved across the seabed towards him. Zane swam as hard as he could towards the surface, but despite the lifesaver around his waist, he sank further into the watery depths. The undead crew began to close in. Soon, the bosun was upon him. Its bony hand reached out, and as its fingers wrapped around his ankle, Zane Crookshank's world went black forever. The technician from the security company arrived the next morning to install the surveillance cameras that Zane had requested. He discovered Zane's lifeless body on the lawn behind the house, not far from the helipad. The police arrived shortly afterward and cordoned off the area. The investigators were baffled. The house was locked up tight, including the windows, and the alarm had been set. Zane Crookshank's body showed obvious signs of trauma. The coroner determined that his death had been caused by falling from a considerable height. But if it was suicide, why would someone slip a ship's lifesaver around themselves before leaping from the third-story rooftop? And an accident seemed equally unlikely. The weather the previous night had been fair, with no rain and just a pleasant breeze. The railing around the Widow's Walk was intact, so a person would have had to climb over it in order to fall. Upon searching the house, investigators found Zane Crookshank's unfilled prescription on the nightside table. They called Dr. Bloom in New York and discovered that the medication he had prescribed was to relieve stress that the doctor believed might have been causing his patient to become delusional. Was it just the lack of a badly needed medication that brought about his untimely death? After all, thousands of people had depended for their very lives on Retronol, the staggeringly expensive drug produced by Prodotes, the company that Zane Crookshank had acquired through a hostile takeover. Fortunately for those people, not long after Zane Crookshank's sudden demise, the company that purchased Prodotes Incorporated from his estate reversed the price increase, thus making it available to everyone afflicted with necromyositis, including the boy in the wheelchair, who would recover and one day become a doctor himself. Was Zane Crookshank's fatal accident death by misadventure, as the coroner ruled? Or was it something more complex? Perhaps something supernatural? Like a curse made long ago by a dying man, murdered by the greed of others, but determined to set things right? To find out, you would have to journey into Otherworld. Otherworld was created and written by Edward Kay. Music, soundscape, and narration by Anthony Vanderberg. We hope that you have enjoyed Abaddon. Watch for more Otherworld stories. Until then.